Okay, we got sound. All right. Good morning. How you guys doing? How many had a late night last night? The ones who had a late night aren't here yet. All right, so I'm here to talk about learning measurement. It's something that I've become passionate about, but I sort of got into it almost by accident. And I'll share that story with you in a minute. I want to start out by saying that I'm really humbled to be here. The work that you guys do is incredible. And I noticed yesterday that you guys are really smart about this stuff. So it's going to be a pleasure for me to bring this to you. My goal today is to talk about learning measurement and learner feedback in particular. But I want to promise you one thing right off. So yesterday, I was listening to the original panel, the early morning panel, and to your work group discussions. And I noticed that measurement is really high on your agenda. And that also, it seemed to me that there was a lot of level of frustration with learning measurement, and something that this frustration that may have come to you over the years. And so I want to promise you this one thing right now to start off. In the 60 minutes we have together, I will not be solving all your learning measurement problems or getting rid of all your learning measurement frustrations. But what I do hope to do is to share with you a methodology that is scalable, that's workable, that can give you better feedback on your learning measurement so that you can improve the learning design and get better outcomes. So one of the things I'm going to do here is share with you a number of websites to go to. And rather than have you worry about scribbling them all down, you can go to this website here. And the slides are already up there. If you don't have a pencil ready, I'm going to share this later. The first thing I want to do is introduce myself a little bit so you'll know where I'm coming from on this issue. And you'll know my sweet spots and some of my blind spots as well. So Work Learning Research is my research and consulting firm. It's not a 10,000 person consultancy. It's basically me. And what I've tried to do for the last 18 years is to bridge the gap between the research side of the learning field and the practice side. There's wisdom in both camps, but we tend to speak different languages. So one of my roles is to translate research. So every year, or almost every year, I read over 200 articles from the scientific referee journals on learning, memory, and instruction. And I try to distill some practical recommendations. Now, when I get into the research, sometimes I look like this kid. I look afraid. I'm kind of like, oh my gosh, will I get my head around this? Because when you get into the research, you read one research article, and it might cite 30 or 100 other research articles. And at least you got to read at least 5 of those other ones. And so you read those 5 others, and then you've got to read 5 others. And it sort of grows exponentially. Now, after a while, you begin to get your head around it a little bit, and you get some sense of it. But, you know, the research is so complex, and there's so many scientific studies that are out there that no one person can really get their head around it. What I try to do is to take these complicated things and simplify them. So I really resonate with this quote from Leonardo da Vinci. Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. So one of the things I do is to try to create simple models out of the research recommendations. So the decisive dozen, what I call the 12 most important learning factors, and there's a link down there. You can go and look at a research review of that. The training maximizers model. So you can see that there's 7 things that we ought to aim for in our training results. If you look at the first 3, we tend to be pretty good at those. It's the last 4, support for decision-making competence, support for long-term remembering, support for application of learning, and support for perseverance in learning, that we're not so good at. But again, just an example of the simple models that are designed to be practical for trainers, instructional designers, e-learning developers. I also create research to practice reports and give those away for free at the Work Learning Research Catalog website. And so this brings me to 2007. I was looking at the learning research. And for some reason, I was thinking about learning measurement at the time, and I realized that looking at how human cognition works, some of what we do in learning measurement is biased. And so I wrote a research to practice report on that. And surprising to me, it really resonated with people, and I got invited to do workshops and keynotes and consulting based on this. And you might wonder, well, why does a research guy care about learning measurement? And the reason is very simple. The research gives us some good ideas about what to do. But we really need to have some feedback loops to know what to do on a daily basis, to give us feedback as professionals so that we know how to improve what we're doing. And when I looked at the research and saw these biases, I said, well, we can probably do better. This brings us to this year when I published the book Performance Focused Smile Sheets, and you can see some nice words about that. What I'm most gratified, though, with was to get feedback on my initial draft from some learning measurement experts, people like Rob Brinkerhoff, Jack Phillips, Bill Coscarelli, and also some brilliant learning folks like Julie Dirksen and Clark Quinn and Adam Neiman to make the book better. So what I'm going to do today is share some of the wisdom from the book, and obviously not all the wisdom from the book. So I call these things smile sheets, but we're really talking about learner feedback. Learner feedback questions, you can see there's many names for them. Different parts of the world call them different things. Different industries call them different things. Now in the United States, smile sheets is the most common term, and it tends to have a derogatory meaning or a slightly derogatory meaning, and I wanted to reclaim it because I do think that smile sheets can be effective or more effective than we make them. So this is my alert to you. I'm going to have a lot of stuff I'm going to throw out at you, and some of it may be somewhat provocative to challenge your long-held beliefs about some of this stuff. So if you find yourself getting sweaty palms, you know that that's just part of the process. All right, so number one, in fact, I have 10 points for you today. So number one, measurement should start out with a clear sense of our goals. So three reasons to measure learning. Number one, to demonstrate the value of our learning interventions. Number two, to support our learners in learning. And number three, to improve the learning. Now, when I go out and ask people in the corporate training field what's most important, they give me this kind of priority. Number one, demonstrate the value. Two, support learners. Number three, improve the learning. In fact, I did some research with the e-learning guild a few years ago, and this is exactly what we found, that improving the learning was often sort of the poor stepchild, was our lowest priority. We didn't think about it that much. But this is where I really come down on this stuff. I think this is critically important for us to get that feedback so we can know what how well we're doing and what to do to make it better. This is Robert Brinkerhoff. He wrote a book with Tim Mooney, which is a great book, by the way, Courageous Training. And he says, the goal of training evaluation is not to prove the value of training. The goal of evaluation is to improve the value of training. Now, I resonate with that, but I think, there's arguments to be made for the others as well. Okay, number two, we work in a learning to performance ecosystem. So this is the learning landscape model. We have our learning intervention, our performance, our on-the-job performance situation, and our learning outcomes. And hopefully, when we create our learning and our training, that our learners understand, they comprehend the material. And later on the job, they remember what they've learned. they apply what they've learned, and they get a return on their efforts, and the organization gets a return on its investment. Now this flow here, this causal pathway, I want you to pay attention to what's on there. First, they have to understand, then they have to remember, then they have to apply before we get our results. This is what we typically think about, but it's not the only thing. There are prompting mechanisms as well. Performance can be prompted through job aids, signage, intuitive cues that are built into our tools and equipment. This is where performance support comes in and management. And you'll notice that this remembering and prompting are really the two ways, and I'm oversimplifying here a bit, but the two ways that we can get information into working memory and act on it. But there's also on-the-job learning as well. People learn through trial and practice by having creative insights. Oftentimes when we think about learning, we think about transferring knowledge from some materials or an instructor or an e-learning program to our learners. But when someone has a creative insight, whether that's in our training or not, they've learned something. And so there's an opportunity there as well. Getting help from others, this is where social media can come in and studying on their own. And you'll notice three pathways. People can learn on the job to remember later on the job. They can learn on the job when they're dealing with a performance issue. This is sort of the just-in-time learning. And they can also create, for example, a job aid for themselves to prompt their behavior later. Now, if this is the whole learning landscape, number one, we might think, when I'm designing learning, I ought to think about the whole learning landscape. And you can see that both Julie and Con talked about this yesterday. And in Nathan's presentation as well, we talked a lot about the performance support stuff. But this is what we typically think about. And so sometimes we're in a box on this, but we ought to think more broadly in terms of learning design and learning measurement. There's a YouTube video if you want to reflect on this more or share it with colleagues. So I'm really into remembering, and I like elephants, and elephants are supposed to remember a lot. But look what's on the causal pathway here, remembering. That has a lot of implications for learning design, that we need to design learning to ensure that people remember, but also for learning measurement as well. Oftentimes, for example, we measure right at the end of training. When we measure right at the end of training, we're looking at whether people are able to understand at that point in time. We're not able to assess whether they're going to be able to remember it later. Okay. So, I presented this complicated model, but I want to bring it down to capacity building and create something a little more straightforward. So we train and we teach, and then our learners hopefully understand and become skilled, and then they remember when they're in their work site, and then they perform their work, and they get the outcomes that we hope for. And when we think about measuring learning, we can think about measuring all these things. Now, obviously today in our 60 minutes, we're not going to be able to cover the whole thing, but there are opportunities in all these areas. Okay, number 3, and this is what I start all my measurement workshops with. We should not expect perfection in our learning measurement instruments. So measurement, if we think about that in terms of a street lamp, measurement will help us illuminate some things, but not illuminate everything. I was talking to Julie yesterday, and she'll tell you a little joke if you buy her a glass of wine tonight about this, and I'll leave it at that. All right, no perfect measurement tool. So no perfect measurement tool, no perfect smile sheet, no perfect smile sheet question. What we hope to do is to create good proxies for the targeted behaviors or targeted outcomes we're looking at. Okay. So given that there's no perfect measurement tool, I want to get a sense of what you think about your learner feedback forms, your learner feedback questions. And I'm going to give you 4 choices. Well, I'm going to give you 5 actually. But you could say that they're terrible, bad, these are the negative ones, or okay or good, those are the positive ones, or we don't really get feedback from learners. So, how many of you say that your learner feedback forms at this point in time are terrible? Nobody? Okay, let's do a test here, just to make sure. Everybody raised both their hands? Okay, I just wanted to make sure. All right. All right. Okay. All right, so how many people say bad? All right. You guys can put your hands down now, sorry. I should be Simon. Simon didn't say. Okay. How many people say they're okay? This side of the room is very okay. That's awesome. I don't know about you guys. How many people say good? All right. And how many people say, well, we don't really get that much feedback from our learners? Okay, a couple. So, not many of you are on this side. If you were on this side, I'm going to hopefully give you a sense of hope that you can get better. Now, if you're on this side, I'm going to challenge you a little bit. I'm going to challenge you a little bit to think about some opportunities for improvement. Okay? All right, number 4. The Kirkpatrick model controls our thinking. How many know the Kirkpatrick model? Okay, so maybe half. All right, this is the Kirkpatrick model. It's a 4-level model. So level 1 is the learner reactions. These are our smile sheets. Level 2 is tests of learning. Have the learners understood? Do they comprehend? Level 3 is on-the-job behavior. Are the learners putting things into practice? And level 4 are the business results. That's the term that the Kirkpatricks use, but really organizational results or societal results. Okay? Now, if you know this model, I'm going to have a few warnings. This is, by the way, the most predominant model of learning measurement in the training field in general. So if you know this model, I'm going to give you a little bit of warning about it. If you don't know this model, it might be a good thing. So, yeah, I think some of you know what I'm going to say here. So the Kirkpatrick model controls the way, if you know it, it tends to control the way we think about learning measurement. You know, whether you love the model, whether you hate it, whether you like it for some things and not for others, it controls the way we think. And some of the people you may talk to in the field, it may be controlling their thinking. So the warning about that is, in some ways it's very good, but in other ways it has some limitations. Now, I don't want to get into too much detail, but I'm going to give you a quote from this excellent research review of the training research. And by the way, if you can't get this research review, or you don't like reading research reviews, this is my review of the research review. But they said this: historically, organizations and training researchers have relied on Kirkpatrick's 4-level hierarchy as a framework for evaluating training programs. Oops. Hey, slow down. Unfortunately, I added the unfortunately, the Kirkpatrick framework has a number of theoretical and practical shortcomings. It is antithetical to nearly 40 years of research on human learning, leads to a checklist approach to evaluation, and by ignoring the actual purpose for evaluation, risks providing no information of value to stakeholders. Ouch. Okay, that's pretty damning. But, to be fair, the researchers said, well, you probably ought to use the model anyway, at least in your discussions with other people, because that's what everybody knows. But I just want to leave this warning with you to think outside the Kirkpatrick 4-level box. Okay. All right, number 5, a little introduction to smile sheets. I'm going to make a bold statement here. But here we are, learning professionals, and we have a number of doors. We have a number of decisions we make every year. And we have to prioritize what we do. And what I've seen, and what you've probably seen as well, that the smile sheet work that we do tends to be a low priority. We don't prioritize it. We sort of have to do it, but we don't prioritize it. We prioritize design and things like that much more appropriately. But I'm here to make this bold statement. This year, improving your smile sheets will likely be the most important thing you can do to improve learning. Now, I make that statement for this reason, that one of the most important things we can do is to get feedback on how well we're doing with our learning interventions. And typically, and I'm going to show you some research that's going to blow your mind if you haven't seen it before, but we're not getting that good of feedback. Now, I don't know if I'm really going to be able to convince you, but I want to put it out there as a challenge. All right, so reasons for smile sheets. I borrowed this list and modified it from Rob Brinkerhoff. These are the things that I focus on. Number one, red flagging training programs that are not sufficiently effective, gathering ideas for ongoing updates and revision of a learning program, judging strengths and weaknesses of a pilot program to enable revision, providing instructors with feedback to aid their development. That's all about the effectiveness of the learning intervention. But it's not the only things that we might ask on a smile sheet. There's other things as well. Helping learners reflect on and reinforce what they learned, helping learners determine what, if anything, they plan to do with their learning, capturing learner satisfaction data to understand and make decisions that relate to the reputation of a training or the instructors, upholding the spirit of common courtesy by giving learners a chance for feedback, and my favorite, enabling learner frustrations to be vented to limit damage from negative back-channel communications. All right, so these are about effectiveness. These are about some other things. They're all important. I'm going to focus on these because we tend to not focus on these, and we need to. All right, so here's the research. So this is a meta-analysis, a scientific study of many other scientific studies on the correlation between smile sheets and learning results. Are they correlated? So this was one done in the 1990s, and they looked at level 1, that's the learner feedback forms, the smile sheets, compared to level 2, the learning results, and they found a correlation of 0.09. Now, statisticians tell us that a correlation below 0.30 is considered a weak correlation. So 0.09 is virtually no correlation at all. They also looked at level 1 and level 3. So what we have, and that's weak as well. So what we have is a very weak relationship between the levels. If one meta-analysis of many other scientific studies wasn't enough, a second one was done in the 2000s, and they found the exact same result looking at different studies. They also looked at Cohen's D effect size and found no practical significance. A very weak relationship. So what this means, what the practical implication of this is that traditional smile sheets tell us very little about our learning results. Let me make this very clear. If you get high marks on your smile sheets, you could have a very effective course or a very ineffective course. If you have low marks on your smile sheets, you could have a poor learning design or a good one. With traditional smile sheets, we just can't tell. Now, when I first saw this research, I said, oh no! What does this mean? What should we do? Maybe we should just stop using smile sheets. They don't tell us anything. They probably tell us some things that are wrong. They give us, sort of some information that just doesn't quite make sense. And then I said, well, wait a minute, there's not only learning effectiveness, there's some of those other reasons for the reputation of the course, to get learner satisfaction data, to give them a chance to vent, etc. So those things are important. Let's be serious. We're going to do this anyway, aren't we? We're going to use smile sheets anyway. So then the question I had was, well, can we make them better? And after thinking about it a while, I said, well, we cannot make them perfect. We may not even be able to make them great, but I think we can make them better. So that's why I went down this road. So why might our smile sheets be problematic? One of the reasons is that we use Likert-like scales and numeric data responses, and they create poor data. So a Likert-like scale, we give people a statement, and we ask them, do you strongly agree? Do you agree? Do you neither agree nor disagree? And then we turn that into some numbers, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now, Sharon Schrock and Bill Coscarelli, who wrote the classic text on criterion reference test development, oh, I'm not supposed to stand here, sorry guys, said this on Likert-like scales. The resulting scale is deficient in that the response words, that's these over here, are open to many interpretations. They're fuzzy. So what we do is we take these numbers and then we take an average. My course is a 4.1. But a 4.1, a number like that, that's based on fuzzy adjectives and some fuzzy numbers, that doesn't mean that much. So how do we make sense of that? Well, we have to compare that number to something else. We could compare it to our previous results, our previous smile sheet results. Wait a minute though. Those previous smile sheet results are based on, we looked at those meta-analyses, right? So those previous smile sheet results are based on meaningless data. And so we're comparing meaningless data to our current meaningless data. That's not going to work very well. So maybe we could use a standard. I used to run a leadership development product line for the strategic management group, and we hoped that our trainers would get 4.5s on a 5-point scale. If they started to get below 4.0, we'd try to coach them up. If they kept it below 4.0, we'd push them out. But where did we get that standard? We pulled it out of thin air. And what's worse about that is that most smile sheet ratings on a 5-point scale end up between like 3.8 and 4.4 anyway, so not much. So we can't rely on the standard. Wait a minute, we could maybe rely on other courses that are taught in our organization, or maybe other organizations. Well, wait a minute. If their data is based on information that's meaningless, and we're comparing it to our information that's meaningless, then that doesn't work very well. So this whole thing doesn't work that well. Let's dive into this, though, a little bit more. When we're asking our learners for their responses on smile sheets, we're trusting them to give us good information about their experience with the learning. And we'd like to trust them. They come to us. They want to do well in the training, probably, most of them. They want to do well in their work. But there's some research to show that learners don't always know their own learning. They're overly optimistic about their ability to remember. If you ask your learners after you train them something, you're going to be able to remember this? Oh yeah, I got it. It's in here. They fail to give themselves retrieval practice. We know from the research, you heard Nathan cover it yesterday, and Julie talked about it as well, that retrieval practice is one of the most important things we can provide our learners to help them remember, to support their long-term remembering. But our learners fail to give themselves that retrieval practice, probably because they're overly optimistic. They fail to properly use examples. They can't always overcome their faulty prior knowledge. In fact, there's been 2 recent reviews of the research that emphasize that learners have a lack of knowledge about their own learning. So, does this mean we shouldn't ask them any questions? I don't think so. I think what it means is that when we design our questions and we provide them with those learner feedback forms, we have to support them in the decision making. We have to support them. Okay, so I like to get on a soapbox about this. I could stand up here, but I like to use this word transmogrify because it's a really cool word. It means to transform something in a way that is surprising or magical. So this is what we do. We start with fuzzy adjectives, and then we magically turn these adjectives into numbers. We average the responses, losing more information. When we take an average, we don't know how widely dispersed the data is. We don't know if it's skewed to the left or skewed to the right. Okay, then let's say we had 8 questions on our smile sheet. We would take one of those questions and report the result. My course is a 4.1. So at every step in this process, we're losing information, which is probably one of the reasons why our smile sheets don't tell us what we'd like it to tell us. And it gets worse. Statisticians and mathematicians tell us that you're not allowed to take nominal data and turn it into interval and ordinal data. So you're not allowed to do that. It's illegal. Can't be done. But that's what we do. So a lot of problems with that. So I've thrown out a lot of stuff at you. So I think it's a good time to sit back and reflect on this and ask questions. So if you have a question, what questions do you have so far? Testing. This on? Okay. Oh, yes.
Thank you very much for the presentation, and thank you for the critical view on the method we've been using to measure our trainings or our learners. So my question is, if it is so illegal to turn the adjective into numbers, so what are we left with? What do you advise? Because you are continuing to train people.
Oh, I don't know.
You should have an idea.
I will get to that. That's a great question. But
Okay.
you have to wait a little bit longer.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So it's not, the smiley sheets are not just used for training, for client service feedback and other areas as well.
Yes.
And do those also show similar results?
I haven't seen research on that, but I expect, because they have the same kind of problems, that they would have the same difficulty. Yeah, a lot of, one of the things, like conferences use smile sheets, and they can't ask as many questions, but they can be designed better as well. I mean, some of the questions on conferences are just terrible. But yeah, I think it runs rampant, and people have begun to talk to me about other applications for the sort of the approach I'm going to recommend. What other questions? Does anybody want to go cry or to, or to challenge? Does anybody say, no, I love my smile sheets, they're the best thing in the world? Seriously, I shouldn't laugh about that, because you could have good smile sheets. All right. I will plow forward, and we'll have some other time for reflection. All right, number 7, we must go beyond smile sheets. I'm talking about smile sheets today. I wrote a book on it, but I always emphasize, and I did this 20 times in the book, that smile sheets should not be our only way to get feedback. We need to do more than that if we're really serious. So we got smile sheets here, but we can also look at what learners are able to do, what supports they have to do it. We might want to evaluate the supports, because it might not be the training per se, it could be the supports that are out there. And we can also look at meeting target goals. So just wanted to put this slide in there to remind you, or to remind me to tell you, that smile sheets are just one part of an overall system of learning measurement. All right, smile sheets can be improved. I'm going to take you on my journey. I do workshops. I like to have better smile sheets. And what happens is I create a smile sheet, and then I think, this is perfect. And then a couple months later, I go, this is terrible. I got to improve it. And this cycle goes on. And I haven't reached perfection yet, but I keep trying. I want to share with you an earlier version, And I want to do it not because it's completely terrible and not because it's good, but because there's some lessons to be learned. So this was my new smile sheet a number of years ago. You can see actually I put my picture on the smile sheet, and I was a lot younger then. I wasn't quite as good looking back then, but you know. Now, you can't read this, but I wanted to show you this on 2 pages. So I'm going to go into it some. So, and let me say that one of my first insights about smile sheets was that my learners are making decisions when they're answering my smile sheet questions. They're making decisions. So what can I do to support them? And what kind of problems might they have? Well, one of the things, if you're a learning person, is, people forget stuff. So I was thinking, well, let's say I do a one-day workshop and I give them a smile sheet at 5 o'clock. What's going to be what are they going to remember easily? They'll probably remember stuff that we covered between 4 and 5, and probably stuff early in the morning between like 8:30 and 9:30. And the rest of the day might be a little bit fuzzy. So I thought to myself, what I'm going to do is I'm going to remind them about some of the concepts that we covered. So here's an example, and remember there's like 10 to 15 of these, but here's one. 2 common practices in measurement bias our results. Measuring learning at the end of the program may bias the results. Similarly, measuring learning in the learning context may bias the results. So I like this part of it, but then I asked them, how valuable is the concept to you? And I don't like this. I think it's too vague. I also don't like numbers. Numbers are even fuzzier than Likert-like skills. So I wouldn't do that anymore. Then I asked a question, how new was the concept to you? I think that one's okay. Then I asked, how well was the concept taught? And now I don't like that. I think it's too fuzzy. It's not specific enough. I'm not helping the learners make a grasp of things. I need to be more specific. And I didn't really like the answer choices there. So another thing, one of the things I hate about smile sheets is when you give them 100 questions. And you ask them about the breaks, and how were the breaks long enough, and was there good cookies, and was the coffee okay, and were the bathrooms clean enough? You can go down the list. And so one of the things I thought, I'm just going to simplify that because I know that I'm going to hope and trust that I'm going to get good feedback about the important things in the comments section, in the open-ended comments. But another thing here I wanted to share with you. I wanted to help learners calibrate, and I put this phrase in the middle there. You ever seen a smile sheet, and this happens a lot, people circle the same answer all the way down? What does that mean? They're not thinking. They're just not thinking deeply about it, and so I wanted to slow people down, and my idea to do that was I'm going to put this little phrase in their average, and I'm hoping that what will happen is they'll go, let's see. Is this better than average? Is it worse than average? And sort of to anchor them, and anchor their responses. Now, I don't like the numbers at all. I wouldn't do this anymore, but the concept of slowing them down and getting to think a little bit more, I think is a good one. And finally, some of our best feedback comes from comments. I used to be a highly mediocre leadership trainer. But I got better partly because I looked at my comments on my smile sheets, and over time helped me get better. Now, one of the mistakes we make sometimes, whether it's a paper version or electronic, we ask an open-ended question, but then we have only a little box. What message does that send? Don't say anything. We don't care what you think. All right, so make them big, right? All right. So now I'm going to talk about performance-focused smile sheets, what you've all been waiting for, the answer to your question. All right, so before I do that, I want to tell you about something that's been happening in the learning field, this incredibly great thing, that we are in the golden age of learning research. In the last 10 to 15 years, we've really been able to compile really powerful recommendations for people. And this is evidenced by popular books now that you can get. Things like Make It Stick by the researchers Roediger and McDaniel, Urban Myths About Learning Education, Design for How People Learn by, who is that? And Peak from Anders Ericsson, who's done a lot of research and expertise, and other books like Benedict Carity's book. There's great books on learning research in the popular press, learning of science stuff. There's also these research reviews that are out there. There's also people that are doing research translations. Julie does this. Patty Shank does this. Carl Kopp does this. Clark Quinn does this. I do this. So there's really good stuff out there. All this science of learning stuff, clearly we ought to be using it for learning design. But we also might think about using it for learning measurement as well. I mean, we're measuring learning. We ought to base that on some things that are fundamental about learning. All right, so now I'm going to present like a lot of information. So warning. I'm going to simplify it though, but let's say we wanted to create the maximally effective smile sheet. So this is our ultimate goal, then we have primary goals, secondary goals, and tertiary, third level goals. So maximally effective smile sheet, what would our primary goals be? I offer two. Is the learning effective? Will the learning be effective in supporting on-the-job performance? And are the results actionable? Will the smile sheet results communicate with clarity and urgency to guide action? Okay, now is when it's going to get scary. Okay, ready? Okay, so there's a lot of stuff there, but basically this means, are we following the science of learning factors that matter? So I'm going to go back and delve into one of these. We know one of our secondary goals is that learners should be able to remember. And then our tertiary goals for that might be, are we providing learners with realistic practice, the spacing, situation, action triggers? So you can see the kind of things we might delve into. Okay, so that's the top part. We're looking at learning effectiveness. Now the result's actionable. And that's even more too much information. Okay, but basically three things. Are the questions well designed? Are they clear? Do they avoid bias? Number two, are the learners making good smile sheet decisions? Are we supporting them in that? And number three, are the data we're getting clear and actionable? And to be specific about that, do the data go beyond the my courses of 4.1? Because that's fuzzy. I'm not sure what that means. So let's think about what most of our smile sheets provide. On this map, learners are engaged and they have a belief in the value of the concepts. They're missing all this other stuff, you know. And you know, PowerPoint is a great thing, but you know, sometimes there's not enough space. I'd really like to have like a fourth column here to have fourth level goals, but you know, can't do that with PowerPoint. I kind of wish that I could just, you know, like go and look at that. Fun with PowerPoint. All right, so this is what our traditional smile sheets, and by the way, quaternary, I had to look that word up, fourth level goals. Traditional smile sheets, learners rate instructors as credible and engaging. Learners say classroom environment was conducive to learning. Learners satisfied with the experience. Learners think the course was well organized. These things are reasonable to ask, but they don't get at that learning effectiveness. They're very far removed from our secondary goals and our primary goals. Okay, so what does a good question look like? I'm going to share this question, and after I share it, I'll tell you the two reasons that I like it. A better smile sheet question. In regard to the course topics taught, how able are you to put what you've learned into practice on the job? I am not at all able to put the concepts into practice. I have general awareness of the concepts taught, but I will need more training, practice, guidance, or experience to do actual job tasks. I am able to work on actual job tasks, but I'll need more hands-on experience to be fully competent. I'm able to perform actual job tasks at a fully competent level and at an expert level. I like this question for two reasons. I used to call this, by the way, the world's best smile sheet question. I've decided it's probably not the world's best, but it's an iterative process. All right, but here's why I like it. Number one is asking about something that's important, performance. And number two, there's granularity between the answer choices. We're not asking people to choose between strongly and agree, which are fuzzy. We're asking them to choose between things that are much more concrete. So when they're making their decisions, they're able to give us, they're able to think through it a lot more clearly. The other benefit of the granularity is that when we go to show the results, when we go to look at the results, we can be much more clear. And we can get a graph that looks something like this. These words, by the way, I call standards, and we'll talk about those in a minute. Let me show you another question. Same question, but written with shorter words. I got it, thank you. How able are you to put what you've learned into practice on the job? Choose one. I'm not at all able. I'm not at all ready to use the skills got. I need more guidance to be good. I need more experience to be good. I'm fully competent, capable at an expert level. All right, so now let's talk about those standards. This is a different question now that you've taken the course. How well do you feel you understand the concepts? So for this answer, we have to decide what should our standard be for that. And for most courses, this would be unacceptable. I have an expert level understanding of the concepts. What would the standard be for that? Well, that's just an unlikely response for most of our courses. How are we going to give them complete expertise? So that's unlikely. Now you might ask, Will, why would you ask a question where the answer choice is unlikely? Well, the reason is I want to slow them down. There's a bias to think that I should always circle number 5 because that's the best response. I want to get them away from that. What about this one? I have basic familiarity with the concepts. You know, it might depend on the kind of course we're teaching. So I'm just going to oversimplify here, but let's say we have a course where we want them to have some awareness of concepts. We could have that kind of course, and that might be acceptable to give them familiarity. But if we had a performance-focused course, a course that was supposed to help them do something better on the job, we might decide that that's unacceptable. Okay? Solid understanding, we could call that acceptable. Comprehensive understanding, maybe we would say acceptable and superior. All right? It really depends on the course. Now, in the book, I offer 26 candidate questions, questions that you can choose from. I do say this, whatever you do, don't use all 26. But for each of these, I also give some recommended standards for the answer choices. But I also say, whatever you do, don't use my standards. Because this is an excellent opportunity to work with your stakeholders, to decide what is acceptable to you and what is not, and where, you know, what kind of responses you're hoping to get. Okay. So when we have a traditional smile sheets with design learning, we design the smile sheet, we have the training, we deploy it, we collect data, we examine the results, we look, we get a 4.1, and then we decide what the standards are. What does it mean, 4.1? Well, that adds a lot of bias, right? A better way to do this is while we're designing the smile sheet to design the standards, and then deploy, collect data, and we can get something that looks like that in our data. Okay, so here's another question about motivation. In regard to the concepts taught in the course, how motivated will you be to utilize these skills in your work? I will not make this a priority when I get back to my day-to-day job. I will make this a priority, but a low priority. I will make this a moderate priority, I'll make this a high priority, and I'll make this one of my highest priorities. So again, many different types of questions. Motivation to apply is very important, we know that, and there's granularity between the answer choices. So, questions, reflections.
Thank you for the presentation. So in one of our courses, what we do is, actually it's a course run by a colleague, what he does is that whatever responses people have provided, he says you will get it in 6 weeks in your mailbox. So if somebody says, it's my highest priority, in 6 weeks, in your mailbox, you'll get, you said it's your priority, and what have you done since then? Is that something also that...
One of the things we might want to do with a smile sheet is to try to improve the learning, and that's a perfectly acceptable thing to do, yeah. Sorry.
Thank you, Will. It's a very, very beautiful presentation. Thank you so much for sharing. I was just wondering about, because you are explaining about how to measure the learning process or the learning gain by the trainees. I was just wondering how far you could maybe, with this kind of smile sheet, to assess specifically in terms of competencies. I mean, because it's like declaration, right? I would say, yes, I feel like I can do injection, for example. Can be this example. This is a declaration right after the training. And I was just wondering, in the process, if you anticipate maybe to have a kind of, validation of this feeling, because it's only opinion, because we know that when you go back to the workplace, you are dealing with so many emergency routine activities. So all the things that you thought that you could be able to do, maybe.
Yep, that's a great question. So the question is, when our learners tell us that they can do something, should we trust them, right? So a couple things about that. Number one, our smile sheets are a proxy for some of these things we really want to know. Ideally, we would actually test them in some way to see if they could really do it. We might even test them to see if they could remember how to do it a week later or a month later, etc. That would be ideal. We can actually do testing like that and test to see if our smile sheets relate to those results. But that costs extra money. But I think you're right. I think you're right to think about that. Yeah. All right.
All right, thank you, Will. I really enjoyed that. I do want to try to challenge a little bit.
Excellent.
All right. So the first thing is, I wanted to ask, why focus only on that smile sheet moment? Is that actually the best time and place to measure learning? It's, again, if we're challenging our assumptions. And then a lot of the stuff you showed still seems sort of overly focused on the ability to recall rather than on behaviors. And furthermore, still seems to rely on self-assessments. So people's perception of how they are doing with respect to their improvement over time. That how reliable is that? Yes, and are there alternatives? And then I did want to challenge you in the Likert scale stuff, because it does have some...
I know, I'm going against years of tradition, aren't I?
Statistical reliability, and to me it sounded, from my experience, is that we over-interpret and maybe are over-eager to sort of sell the numbers we get. And that if you use a Likert scale and you're measuring something, it should be our responsibility to be clear on what the limitations are, and often we are not in our over-eagerness to simplify and get management to accept and understand. So just wanted to put that
So there's like 3 or 4 questions, and I probably won't remember them all, but we can talk about it later. So you asked basically, is a smile sheet the best way to get at some of these things? Is it the best way to get at learning? No. Is it the best way to get at behavior? No. That's why the Kirkpatrick model is good in this to remind us of some of these other things. I want to emphasize that this is not the only way, but we're going to use them anyway. So let's do them the best way we can. So you're absolutely right. Don't go away thinking that the smile sheet is the only methodology. That's all I can remember, actually.
Overly focus on recall, limitations on self-assessment and perception.
Well, okay, so yeah, these are subjective, absolutely. There's those limitations. I emphasize those limitations in the talk as well. So yeah, let's not put these on a pedestal. Let's know their limitations. But when we do design them, let's do them the best we can. So there's another concept I want to cover because I think you'll like it, and then I'll I'll be available for questions afterwards. So I was going to give you like a test here to see what you like, but okay. So this concept of stealth messages. Because this is really critical, because we can use our smile sheets to send messages to ourselves and to our stakeholders. And the kind of questions we've used in the past, we really can't send those messages. So we need to persuade our stakeholders to get more resources, to get more funding, to help ourselves as the learning team get better feedback. So for example, we might, our stakeholders who train or teach, our bosses or our senior management, our funders, and ourselves, the learning team, we might want to send messages to ourselves. And there we are, good-looking learning and performance professionals. There's our stakeholders. And what we try to do, because we're good at this, is send people rational arguments for why they ought to do what they want to do. And we try to persuade, to educate, to convince. And these are some messages we might want to send. Training should include substantial time for realistic practice. To support behavior training should be followed by reinforcement and coaching. Learners must be motivated to apply what they've learned in their work. And when we teach too much content, we can't provide critical learning supports. And other things, other messages you might want to send. So let's think about this in terms of cognition. This is the human brain, sort of. It's a bad representation, but one of the things we'd like to believe that we as human beings are very proactive, but we tend to be very reactive. So we are influenced by conscious messages coming at us. The kind of arguments that you and I make to our stakeholders are these conscious messages, these arguments. But there's also this big subconscious stimuli that's coming at us all the time. And when we try to convince people, they might even filter out some of our messages. Now you notice the subconscious arrow is a lot bigger because a lot of the things we're getting are a lot more powerful. So we've got this, I wanted to go into the speed limit. Use this as an example, the psychology of traffic, if you will. If we want people to slow down in a residential area, and this is a speed limit sign from the United States, we can put up that sign, and people, they're driving along, and they look at the speed limit. Oh, I'm going 35, and that's sort of using the conscious process, right? But traffic engineers know that doesn't work that well. To really get people to slow down, you narrow the roads. In the United States, when you have the double yellow line, you take those off because that sends a message to go fast. You put trees up beside the road. You do those kind of things, traffic calming processes to make it actually work. We can send some of these stealth messages to our stakeholders, and I'm going to speed through this now because I'm getting the message that I have an X back there. I'm out of time. But there's certain things that we do. So our traditional smile sheet sends the message that what's important is what goes on in the classroom. With performance-focused smile sheets, we can send other messages depending on the questions that we asked. In a delayed smile sheet, we didn't even get into this, but a delayed smile sheet, we can send messages that it's also about what goes on in the workplace as well. So with that, I'm going to be done, and on the slides there's some overall things. I will give you this to go away with. These are some questions to take back to your work groups. Why are you measuring your learning? What messages do you want your learning implements to send? What benefits are likely? What obstacles will you face? What are the workarounds to these obstacles? And when, where, and how will you get started? So I'm going to leave these up there while I say thank you. And been a good discussion. I'll be available in your groups to answer further questions. I'm going to get off the stage. They're going to pull me off. So thank you very much.